Hello, Professor Burrus. My name is Andrew Kricke, and this is the case study report and analysis for the Ford Pinto. The name of the case study is the release of the Ford Pinto. The location of the case study is the Ford Motor Company headquarters in Dearborn, Michigan, Ford manufacturing plants, and all over America. The date of the incident was 1971 to 1976. Kind of spans a little bit of time. The parties, agencies, trustees, stakeholders, patients, victims involved in this incident. So the culpable ones that I found were the Ford Motor Company, Ford engineers, Ford executives, including Ford Vice President at the time, Lee Iacocca, and lobbyists working for Ford Motor Company. Those that were involved were the American public, accident victims, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, otherwise known as the NHTSA, American judicial system, company shareholders, and the United States lawmakers. By 1970, it was becoming apparent due to the skyrocketing gas prices that Americans were finding small, foreign, compact cars as suitable replacements for their large gas-guzzling models that they've been used to driving. Companies such as Volkswagen and Toyota were cornering the market on these small, compact cars. So one of America's premier auto manufacturers, Ford Motor Company, decided they'd kind of carve out their piece of the market by developing a small, compact car. Lee Iacocca, the vice president in charge of operations, decided to speed up the production of this vehicle, which is going to be known as the Ford Pinto. And so that put enormous pressure on the engineers to cut corners and maybe put in place some questionable engineering practices. So one of the things that they had done is they had designed the vehicle to have the gas tank in the very rear of the car, which didn't leave for a lot of space during like a rear end collision or impact. Something like 9 inches, so that's not very much when they're getting hit at high speeds. So they started these pre-production testing and discovered that upon a rear-end impact of like 25 or 30 miles an hour, these cars were catching fire and exploding due to the ruptured fuel tank. Go figure. So the safety standards at the time, by law, they had to have a front-end safety rating of 25 miles an hour plus. Well, Ford looked at their new model that they were producing, and they only had that safety factor built into the front. So the sides and the rear weren't really taken into account. So once they started developing this thing, they ended up getting it produced in 25 months, which the average car manufacturer took about 43 months. So that's a full year and a half before the average car manufacturer could get something out on the road. Engineers, when they were faced with this safety factor, this problem, Lee Iacocca kind of drove his engineers into an objective-based focus instead of safety. So when taking these problems to Lee Iacocca, apparently he had said, focus on the objectives, get back to work. So this didn't create a really safety-driven atmosphere, I'd say. So right before they released this model, they did a cost analysis. And what they had done is they put like a dollar amount on human life, how much monetary damages they would face, if they were taken to court. And I don't think they fully understood the magnitude of the situation, how the American public would respond to, this car and how unsafe it was. So once it was concluded, it was decided to go ahead and put it on the market. So what they also found too is that the monetary value they would pay was significantly less than the profits. So they went with profits rather than the safety. So as expected, once they put it out on the market, people were dying of fiery deaths. It's estimated up to 500 deaths, fiery deaths, occurred during the 1971-1976 um, run of the Ford Pinto. And as you find out later, the the fix was just an $11 fix. So after that, the TSA and Mother Jones magazine released information outlining this fatal flaw in the car. And after court, costs and everything, once victims started taking Ford Motor Company to court, they were forced into correcting this problem and implementing the $11 fix.
The ethical problems involved with this incident are pretty obvious on the surface. I mean, the design of the car put people's lives in risk. It also uh, put people's lives at risk with no regard or no thought for the individual or the families of the individuals. It really all boiled down to cost. Uh, the engineers, after the pre-production tests, after they knew that this car was essentially a bomb or a combustible product, they decided to, instead of make waves or confront the situation with the executives and halt production, they decided to go with it. And so, this kind of brings up two meta-ethical issues, which one was that I found was deontology, which they put their sense of duty to the company, the loyalty to the company, ahead of what was right, what was clearly right. The duty to the company could be in a form of, well, they wanted the company to make money, so that's why they went ahead with their decision. The other one was ethical egoism, which is to say that what was right into maybe themselves, which may branch off to their families or their reputation or anything, was right into the situation. So that's what I kind of discovered for ethical problems. List any concrete real life consequences of the incident. The consequences are huge in this engineering disaster. Once all was said and done, it's speculated that over 500 people had lost their lives. And, I mean, a horrible way to go, to burn to death. And hundreds more injuries than that, and not to mention the unit itself. So people were, even if they survived, out of a car because this, that would total the car after burning up. The Ford Motor Company took a hit as well with the trust of the American public. How are anyone or any consumer supposed to trust a company that puts out a product like this, knowing that it has this defect or at least this flaw in the design? I certainly wouldn't. So specify any institutional agency response to the incident. The American judicial system responded by awarding plaintiffs millions of dollars in damages to the victims' families. When the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and NHTSA finished their investigation, they ordered that Ford recall all the Pintos sold. So this would have been millions of units out there on the market that they had to then call back and then work on and implement this new fix. The U.S. Senate changed safety standards for vehicles manufactured in the United States as a direct response to this incident. Ford Company itself spent millions in court costs, and of course with the recall itself, putting the part in. So list any relevant contextual features, elements. Demand was high because foreign car companies were raking in millions in sales for compact cars. So an element that's relevant is that Ford wanted a piece of the action. They wanted a cut of the market, like Volkswagen and Toyota, which were making lots and lots of money. They wanted that too. So, America created the demand, and Ford met this demand, but unethically. The timing of the production of the Pinto was right after the lawmakers made the safety standard for cars to be rated for front-end collisions. So the design fit the laws. They didn't break the law by this design. They just adhered to it. But in the back of their minds, they would have had to have known that this was dangerous or a thing that they couldn't do. So Um, Retrospectively, you could say that they thought that they had done their due diligence and designed it exactly as they were supposed to. For the hypothetical considerations, there are a few questions. So the first question is, what are the fundamental engineering problems involved herein? So the Ford Pinto was designed for a rear end gas tank behind the rear axle. So behind the wheel base right there at the bumper. So this calls for only 9 inches of compression from the rear end during a collision. Most compact cars of the time placed the gas tank over the rear axle, so right on top sort of the wheel, which allowed for more compression to be sustained upon impact. The gas tank in the Pinto's design would rupture. So it would just rupture, split apart, rip, whatever, after receiving an impact of over 25 miles an hour and spew combustible fuel over the accident site. If and when a spark would occur after the collision, the fuel would ignite and start a fire. Essentially, the gas tank's placement and the lack of reinforcement around the gas tank allowed for an unsafe vehicle. We found that a solution to the fuel tank problem would cost the company $11. So that's like $70, maybe $80, $100 in today's money, but back then it was $11. It included nothing but a longer fuel filler neck, a stronger fuel filler cap, and a pair of plastic tank shields. The incorporation of this fix would solve the problem. So the second question is, what are the ethical problems involved for your team to consider here? And I addressed this a little bit earlier. So the first ethical problem that I must consider is one concerning deontology. So this is concerning duty, and that duty is to be placed above other principles. Do I remain loyal company man to Ford and keep my mouth shut? Or do I report the earlier pre-production test results to the authorities? Because clearly the executives aren't doing anything about it, so it's sort of on me. Is my duty to the American public, or is it to the company? So who's my duty to? We as a team of engineers would be aware of the design flaw, but to see the fatal nature of the design flaw come to fruition with my fellow countrymen would add depth and gravity to the situation. Another ethical problem is that of ethical egoism. To remain loyal to my employer would ensure income to myself and my family. So that's an interesting question. My decision is right unto me in my situation. My situation being maybe I have a family of 5 kids and they really depend on my salary. And so to make waves and get myself, in trouble or whatever, maybe terminated, that would affect them. So it's right for me just to keep my mouth shut. That's the ethical egoism angle. So I would submit that an engineer must act with honesty and his or her accomplishments, but also with their failures as well. When I hurt the trust of the public, it leaves a disturbing atmosphere with the public, with trust. I mean, why should they trust a company that knowingly puts out products that could harm them? I certainly wouldn't. So the third question, are there any unknown elements which are necessary to be ascertained prior to engagement with the issue? At this stage of the problem, all technical and monetary elements are known. So technically speaking, we know after the pre-production test that cars do ignite upon impact. Monetary elements are known because the cost analysis has been performed, and we found that it's going to cost us potentially this much money in damages, but that our profits are going to be higher. The only unknown element is how the executives at Ford are going to respond to my team and myself refusing, because that's what I think is in this situation is the right thing to do, by refusing to release the Pinto onto the market without the $11 fix to the fuel system. Would this cost us our jobs? Would they make sure we never worked in the auto industry for the rest of our lives? Possibly. And these are pretty severe consequences. So what are the potential consequences, impacts, concerns of your team's analysis to address the problem, raising the incident event? I read an interesting article that said Lee Iacocca instilled an atmosphere of "do as you're told" with his engineers. Basically, concerns to safety at the time were discounted, and emphasis was placed on the completion of the objectives, which of course had nothing to do with how safe the vehicle was. It was not uncommon for Iacocca to fire engineers for getting in the way of these objectives. I would expect that any refusal to release the Pinto onto the market would result in my termination from the company. This extends to my team as well. My suggestion would be to implement the $11 fix in the design. The consequence would be a total correction of the flaming gas tanks after impact. In the long run, this would have saved the company millions of dollars in recalls and court costs. The impact on the public would save countless lives, so there is no question whether the problem should be addressed. So, this concludes the report. Thank you, Professor Burrus, and really appreciate this class and everything it's done. Enjoy.